Can Dr. David Ndii stop reggae? Can this great son of Kenya, with a track record to boot, derail the BBI process? Because Dr. Ndii, together with other 5 Kenyans, have filed a petition that could actually stop the BBI process. Ndii? Now, first of all, his name is pronounced Ndii, not Ndii. But I believe at some point, early in his life, he must have just given up correcting people and decided to stick with the wrong version. And it happens in our country called Kenya all the time. There is a man I know called Chaila. Yeah, but because of the way his name is spelled, in school, everybody called him Kiaila. And Kiaila stuck. Now, many Kenyans are wondering. Yeah, some of them are saying, huyu mtu si ni mtu wa Raila? Mbona sasa anataka kusimamisha reggae? Lazima amelipwa pesa na Ruto. You know, it's very sad in Kenya, yeah, that if you support a certain position, yeah, that seems to be supported by a certain prominent political figure, people start labeling you. Indeed, I've even seen on this channel, when you start being balanced, yeah, the people who hate a certain political candidate with all their heart, and then some, will start saying that you've tasted some honey from Sugoi. Folks, we will not go very far with that kind of primitive thinking. Dr. David Ndii has been fighting very aggressively for a better Kenya for a very long time. He is a world-renowned economist, and he has been contracted by many nations, yeah, to help them fix the economies. Some people have even credited Dr. Ndii with the magic that is happening in the Rwandan economy. I have not been able to verify that information. Although what is happening, yeah, the good things happening in the Rwandan economy, have got Ndii written all over them. A tiny landlocked country, you have very few resources. What do you do? Well, today that tiny landlocked country has got an economy that is growing at breakneck speed. And many Kenyans don't know it. But this man Ndii has been around for a very long time, fighting for a better Kenya. Even before the days of the Bombers draft. Yeah, those were the early struggles to get a new constitution. And the Bombers draft was people-driven. Yeah, but then politicians came in and many bad things happened. In 2017, Ndii saw an opportunity, yeah, through those elections to bring change to Kenya. Yeah, and so he got involved with NASA campaigns. Yeah, in fact, he was the NASA chief political strategist. And it made a lot of sense, yeah, because the NASA strategy, yeah, was anchored in fixing the Kenyan economy. But after those elections, yeah, Ndii is on record very early as being opposed to the BBI initiative. And some naive Kenyans immediately said Ndii has fallen out with Raila. I think the key point here is that Dr. Ndii has never fallen out with fighting for a better Kenya. Period. Because if tomorrow David Ndii genuinely brings forward a proposal that will result in a better Kenya, you can be sure Ndii will be there supporting. Anyway, for today we need to answer that question, yeah, that is on the minds of most Kenyans. Will this Ndii petition go through and cripple the BBI initiative? Now, first of all, let us simplify, yeah, what this petition is all about. bila kizungu mingi. The essence of what is being talked about here is that you cannot alter something drastically, suddenly, so much that it becomes something else. And there are some things in this life that are so sensitive that if you alter something very small, they become something completely different. Let's take the human race as an example. Scientists have told us that the difference in DNA between a human being and a chimpanzee is only 1.2%. What that means is that if you find a way, a scientific way, of injecting that 1.2% DNA into a human being, they become a chimpanzee. Something very different. Something that you don't want. You don't want a chimpanzee. You have a human being. There is something even more scary I came across recently. Did you know what the DNA similarities between a human being and a snake are? Brace yourself for this one. The similarities are 99.6%. The DNA similarities. Now, the way our constitution is structured is such that there are some key changes which are not easy to make. Deliberately so. Our constitution was voted for overwhelmingly by Kenyans who said, this is what we want. This is the kind of animal we want. And the legal minds behind the construction of our constitution drew from our rich history of dismantling and destroying constitutions. Our independence constitution, for example, had majimboism, regional governments, and according to my late political lecturer, even regional police forces. But immediately after independence, what the first KANU government did, instead of focusing on changing the lives of ordinary Kenyans, instead of focusing on other priorities, their top priority was to dismantle the independence constitution, which they did successfully. So much so that if I speak about regional governments in early days of independence today, most Kenyans are clueless. Huh? No, Chris, stop misleading us. And so legal roadblocks were put in place to make sure that what has happened before will not happen again. Roadblocks like a very high majority required to change some things in the constitution. And in other cases, a referendum, a vote of the people, is required to change certain aspects of the constitution. Now, we know that what the BBI initiative seeks to do is to change a lot of these very sensitive things, with one stroke of the pen, in one referendum. Now, does that sound legal to you? In my view, what we're trying to do here is to change a human being into a cockroach. Oh, yes. The DNA changes, are just too much. Too many. So that we'll end up with something very different. In other words, in my view, it would make more sense to go back to the drawing boards and create a completely new, brand new constitution. Now, we all know that the BBI, the handshake, saved Kenya. And we should be very grateful for that. Those of us who are around, who were in Kenya at the time when all this was going down, must be forever grateful. If you're in the diaspora at the time, very far away from Kenya, you may not understand. However, there are those who argue that in 2017, we only had one problem: electoral justice. Simply put, our problem was the people vote, the computer decides. Instead of the people vote, the people decide. In my view, the problem was a little more deeper than that. The problem was that our politicians organized us into neat tribal compartments. Our selfish politicians made sure that Kenyans would never vote issues, but instead would vote along tribal lines. This was deliberate and important in their plans, so that when the computer decided on somebody who had not won the elections, there would be a militia to protect the results the computer spat out. You see, many of you may not know this, but Kenyans by nature are not tribal. In the 1957 LegCo elections for Nairobi, voters in Nairobi, most of them hailing from the Kikuyu tribe, voted in a Luo, and ignored another prominent Kikuyu candidate from a very prominent Kikuyu family. And most of these Kenyan voters who did that in 1957 were illiterate, very poorly educated at best. And so somebody would have predicted at that time that by the time we get to a year called 2020, any candidate would come up to the microphone and start talking about tribes would be laughed off. Instead, in the year 2020, we are 100 years behind from the year 1957. Courtesy of our politicians. And if you don't believe me, visit a place called Eastlands. And you'll find three blood brothers called Njoro, Omosh, and Waf. Those individuals have no interest in what tribe their bosom buddy comes from. They have no interest, they have no time. It is irrelevant. And it is not surprising that Sheng, the twisted Kiswahili English language Kenyans speak, originated from Eastlands. Visit any part of Kenya. Kenyans from different tribes are living together. And they're peaceful. And they're happy. And they're doing deals. And they're marrying each other. But when an election comes along, when the politicians take to the podium, so the problem we had to fix in 2017 was to make sure that when people vote, the results reflect how they voted. And then, using our current constitution, enforcing our current constitution, all we had to do was to make sure that no candidate would campaign along tribal lines. Period. Problem solved. But instead, after the 2017 elections, after the handshake, what we wanted to do was to change the entire DNA of our constitution, when all that was required was simple medication. Indeed, there are those Kenyans who believe that if we just fix the issue of ensuring that Kenyans' vote counts, then everything else would fall into place. Just have an election where the results would be accepted. And there'd be no problem. The problem comes about when you give us election results that don't make sense, because Kenyans are not idiots. In 2002, Kenyans were given election results that made sense Was there any trouble? No. Did we have tribal groupings in those elections? Did politicians organize Kenyans into neat tribal compartments? The answer is yes. And still, we had no problem. Of course, it helped that the winner won by landslide. By the way, in 2017, the winner also won by a landslide. In my view, barring any political interference, the petition by Dr. David Ndii and 5 other Kenyans has a very good chance of gaining merit in our justice system, and going through. In my view, it has merit. It has a good chance. But take careful note of what I've said. Barring any interference, political and otherwise. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.